Okay, so here we are back in our Hello World, our minimal app here. And so in this section, I'd like to talk about how you do styling. So we talked about how you do your imports, you pull in stuff that you can use, how you set up your main function, main body of your app right here. And then now we have something happening on our screen, but it's not very pretty. So we want to make it look a little bit nicer. So that involves styling. That's where the third part of our app comes in. Now, before we go into that, I also want to remind you that it's real important that you remember to frequently save your work. So notice the save button up here. It doesn't auto-save. So if you do a bunch of work and you don't save it and you close your browser crashes or what have you, you're going to lose that work. So you got to make sure you save. Okay, so I'm going to save it. Confirms for me that I've saved it. Now, also, once you've saved it, then if you copy your address bar, if you copy the URL in your address bar, now you can share that with somebody else and they can actually see your work as well. So for me, when you turn in your work on Google Classroom, that's how you're going to turn it in. It's like your REPL share link. You make sure you've saved your work, and then you copy the URL in your address bar of your browser, and then that's what you're going to submit on REPL. On Google Classroom. So that's how you submit your work. Okay, so let's talk about styles. So remember how styles work for websites. For websites, we use CSS, Cascading Style Sheets, and that was a language we used to specify things like fonts and spacing and stuff like that. And so the way we did it was we had a separate CSS file in our website where we put all our styles. We could have several different styles within that. And then in our main HTML files, that's where we pulled in the styles, and that's where we saw the result on our web page. So with mobile apps, it's kind of the same thing, except instead of having a separate CSS file, you're going to put it directly in the third part of your app, in the third section of your app. Not exactly CSS, though. You're going to see a lot of similarities. A lot of things are very similar to how CSS works, but it's not exactly the same. So be careful with that. There's some differences that are important, so it's not just a one-to-one correspondence with CSS. Okay, so let's add some style. So first thing we got to do is we got to pull in another basic component. So I'm going to go up here to my import section in line 2, where I pulled in the view and the text, those basic default components. I'm going to pull in another one. I'm going to add a third thing to the list, and it's called a style sheet. Okay, notice how I spelled. Notice the capital S's, notice the capitalization, style sheet. The S's are capitalized. Style sheet is a basic component that allows us to specify styles. We need to pull in the style sheet component in order to specify our own styles for our app. So we pull it in there. Okay, now on the bottom here, this is where I'm going to put all the stuff about styles. Okay, so let me show you how to set it up, how it looks. Const styles equals style sheet dot create, open parentheses, open curly brace. Okay, and it looks kind of like that. Okay, so what's going on here? Well, briefly, const means constant. Constant means something that doesn't change through the course of your app as it runs. So your styles are not going to change as you run your app. Styles, that's the name of the style container that I'm gonna use. It's kind of like the name of your CSS file. You can name it whatever you want, but I called styles because it's just kind of suggestive. It helps me remember what it does. There's our style sheet component. .create means you're going to use the create function of the style sheet component, and now we're going to specify our styles. Funny looking combination of opening parentheses and curly brace, but you see that a lot in JavaScript. You see that combination a lot. Okay, so this is kind of like our CSS file. Just like our CSS file, we could put a bunch of different styles within that. So our styles component, we can put a bunch of stuff within that. Okay, so we can make several styles that we can apply to different parts of our site. So I'm going to make my first style. Now we have to give it a name. You can name it whatever you want, but I'm going to pick a suggestive name. I'm going to call it container. Okay, because it's going to apply to the entire view section of my app. So the entire page or the entire screen of my app. I'm going to call it container, put a colon, and then I put another curly brace. So within that set of curly braces there, I list out all the different styles that I want to apply to wherever I use the container style. So this is where, like in CSS, this is where you list out if you want to change colors, if you want to change fonts, if you want to change spacing, all that kind of stuff. That's where you would list this stuff out. Okay, so for example, if I wanted to change, say, like the background color, okay, we talked about colors in CSS. So I could list out that I want to change the background color, and I could give it sort of like a hex code. Okay, remember hex codes from CSS. So let's say I wanted to give it red background. So I could give it FF0000 as my hex code. That's the hex code for red. Okay, now put that in, and you're probably wondering, well, I don't see any change on the emulator, the simulator on the right here. How come? Okay, well, it's because I created this style, but I haven't used it yet. What I have to do is I have to go back to my main program up here and actually tell it that I want it to use that style for something. Okay, so let's go back to the main program. So I want to use that style for the entire sheet, the entire screen of my app. So I'm going to apply it to the view component. Okay, so let me show you how to apply a style to a different part of your app. So I'm going to go in that opening tag of the view component before the closing angle bracket of that opening tag. I'm going to put in some code there. Looks like this. Okay, so view, in the view component, in the opening tag, I put style equals open curly brace styles.container. Okay, so styles, that's the name of my style sheet right here, and container is the name of my, there's styles, and container is the name of my style within that. Okay, so I'm going to apply this style, the container style, to the view component, and you can now see, when I look at my emulator, the background is now red. Okay, so that background of that line is now red. Okay, so now I'm applying the style to that portion of my app. Okay, now I don't like that red background, so I'm going to take that away, but that was just for demo purposes. Okay, let's say that as a goal, let's say that we want to take this text, this hello world text, and we want to center it. So we want to put it in the middle of our screen, both horizontally and vertically. Okay, so let's put some styles that are going to allow us to do that. Okay, so there's three things I got to do to set up the justification of that text. Okay, so first, I've got to tell it that it's got to have flexible layouts. Okay, so it's not just kind of stuck to just kind of a standard, like a typewriter, start in the upper left and just go across and up and down. Okay, we want to tell it that there's got to be some flexibility involved. So the way we do that, there's a style called flex, and you give it a number which tells it how flexible you want it to be, basically. Now, we're going to look at that flex style later on because it's very useful for a lot of things, but for now I'm going to put a value of 1 there, so it allows stuff to move around without being tied to a specific place. Okay, so flex 1. I'm going to put some alignment. So align items is another style specification, and I'm going to give it a value of center. Okay, so that will move it. Now you see what happened. You can see in the simulator here, now the hello world text moved to the center of the screen horizontally. Still at the top vertically, but now it's at the center horizontally. So now that style, the align item style, is now been applied to that. And then there's another style specification called justify content. Okay, and that one, now you see what that one did, is now it moves it to the center vertically. So now that hello world text is in the center of the screen vertically. Okay, so I have this container style that's going to allow me to do that. Okay, now, if I wanted to change something else, I could make another style within this style sheet here, and I could have it applied to a different part of my app. So it's not as if everything you put in here is going to apply to every part of your app. You can selectively apply them to different components in your app, just as how I did here by specifying the style for the specific component that you want to use. Okay, so it's actually very flexible. It's like your CSS file from websites. Okay, so that's how we do styles. So the styles are contained in this third part of your app. You can have several different styles with each one having several different things that you're changing about them. and you can apply them selectively to different parts or different components of your app. Okay, so now we have an app that's now been styled. So now we're ready to go. Now the brakes are off. So now we can actually start to do some really neat stuff. Okay, so that's the third portion of how you build an app, and that's the style portion. I'm going to go ahead and save my work so I don't lose it. And if I needed to submit this or share this with anyone, I could now copy the URL in my address bar, and I could share that with somebody. So if I needed to submit this on Google Classroom, I would copy that link, copy that URL, and then I'd submit that. Okay, so we got all the bases covered. We know about imports, we know about the main portion, and we know now about styles. Okay, so now it's just a matter of refining those and adding to our knowledge to allow us to build some really, really neat apps.